Passionate, driven, enthusiastic, euphoric. This is who we are as entrepreneurs. But how we leverage these incredible attributes to dream and build businesses that scale and grow is what this podcast is all about. Hello, I'm attorneypreneur Josh Brown, and welcome to Franchise Euphoria. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Franchise Euphoria, the podcast where we are focused on providing strategy, education, and consulting to the incredible and growing franchise community. Welcome, everyone. Josh Brown here. You know, today we are going to talk about how to franchise your food truck. Yeah, we're not going to have an interview this week like we've typically have each Thursday, and I'm going to mix in some of these segments where I'm going to talk about topical things, and we're still going to continue with interviews, but may not be each and every Thursday. You know, food trucks have become very, very popular. I know several operators of food trucks, and it's a fascinating business. I know here in Indianapolis, each and every Friday, all the food trucks from down in the city get together and essentially go to this huge parking lot. And you pay a fee, and it's from 4 to 7 p.m. on Fridays, and you pay $10, and you can go in there, and there's like 50 trucks in there, and you can go around and sample different foods and hopefully buy foods from the trucks. And it's really just a cool concept. And I know in our downtown area, there's a dedicated street for a lot of the trucks, but some of them move around from place to place. But it's really kind of interesting, the whole food truck craze. And I was thinking about it as I was contemplating this episode, and as I've said many times, really every business has the potential to be franchisable if it's got a simple process that's repeatable and profitable. And the thing with food trucks is that there are some food trucks that are starting to now go through the franchising model. And the thing about it is, with a food truck, I mean, people love the accessibility of it, right? I mean, you'd love to be able to hop out of your office, go to a food truck, stand in line for a couple minutes. You get quick service. A lot of times they have unique foods. I know there's one here that all they sell is bacon related items, which is pretty funny. But gosh, who doesn't love bacon? Usually they're reasonably priced. They have focused and smaller menus, and a lot of them are just downright delicious. And so they're able, in these small confined spaces, to really deliver delicious food. When I was thinking about franchising in food trucks, it's kind of interesting because when I first thought about it, I wasn't so sure it was a great idea. I mean, when you look at the expense to get into a food truck, I mean, certainly it's going to be less than getting into your typical brick and mortar location, but also your revenues are going to be typically a little bit lower, and you have to deal with weather issues that you don't typically have to deal with in a brick or mortar franchise. But I read a really interesting article online where it talked about a couple different businesses. I think one of them was called Gandolfo's. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's Gandolfo. And they're using food trucks as sort of a test market for their franchise pizza or deli businesses, which is really kind of an interesting concept if you think about it. So let me explain. Essentially what they're doing is they're comprising as part of their franchise package almost like a mobile unit package, where if you're looking at a particular location, let's say you're looking in Dallas, Texas, and you're not sure which location might be a great location for you. Well, what they're trying to suggest is for a lower fee, you can get in to a food truck that serves the same type of foods, and you can figure out which locations are going to work better for you. So maybe you park your truck in one location for a week or two, see how that does. Then you move on to another location, and all with the understanding that you do this for a period of time, and then you move up to the brick and mortar franchise. But while you're building out the brick and mortar franchise, you're still able to benefit from the revenue you're receiving from the food truck. I mean, what a fascinating concept. That is really, really a unique way to approach franchising. In fact, I was kind of blown away when I heard it. I thought, this is fantastic. Now, I think there are some, like with anything, I think there's going to be some concerns. I mean, in most cities and states, you can't just pull up with your food truck and go anywhere, right? I mean, you have to get your permits and you have to go through the process, typically with the city, and you're limited to certain locations. So I think that would cut against, the notion that you can just go find any location and see how it does for your business. But what a great way to really see how the community is reacting to your product. If you got a deli place, if you got a pizza place, a burger joint, even if you're limited in where you can go, I do think it's a really good way to test out a market. And it's a great way to get into a franchise for a lot lower price point than you otherwise could. I mean, typically in a restaurant type franchise, you're looking at a brick or mortar type location. And once you factor in the franchise fee and the build out, you're usually talking about, anywhere from, 200,000 and up, usually, when it's all said and done. Well, with a food truck, I mean, a lot of these food truck businesses, you can get into for $100,000 or under. And if the plan is you're going to get into it, you're going to test out the market, and you believe in the underlying product, and you believe that it's going to be successful, well, you can be successful with a food truck and then also position yourself to step up to a brick and mortar location while you still have the food truck. I mean, how great is that? It's almost like having multiple locations. You can have the brick and mortar, and then you can have the food truck as a component to it. So I think it's a fascinating concept. I don't want to, mislead people and say that I think it's a total winner. I think it's really interesting. It definitely intrigued me. But the idea is that now with the food truck business, we're really starting to look at franchising. As what has happened in every other business sector, eventually franchising comes into play. Why? Because there simply is no better model to expand and grow a business than it is for franchising when it's done right. And I've been saying this for years, when it's done right, there's no better way to expand as a franchisor or the original business owner than growing through a franchise model. Because if you take the time to put your system together, to make sure that you've got your marketing and your operating plan, and you have your business plan for how you want to grow, where you want to grow, and you have a crystal clear understanding of what it is you do, what it is you provide, and how you provide it, it is fantastic to get other people and utilize their money via franchisees, and then they have to hire the employees. And so you're monitoring a system, and you're growing it, and you're getting a piece of it through royalties, and it's really just a great way to grow. Equally, on the opposite side, it's a great way for a franchisee owner operator to get a business that is proven. You've got a proven model, you've got a proven system, and ideally it's been proven to work in at least a few different geographic locations, which definitely proves out the model a little bit and saves, in theory, a lot of the headaches that you could otherwise experience. But the theme behind this podcast today is, how do you take your food truck and now turn it into a franchise? I mentioned briefly a few moments ago about the companies that are now testing that out by having people buy food trucks as sort of a mobile unit to a larger franchise system. Well, I really want to focus on 5 steps that you must think about and you must take if you're really going to turn your food truck into a franchise. The first one is, you must be cognizant and understand the business structure. I know a lot of people who start businesses and a lot of people who are bootstrapping businesses, whether it's a food truck or any other kind of business, they don't really pay attention to the structure of their business. And when you're now thinking about multiplying the number of locations or multiplying the units, it becomes very, very important to take a look at your corporate structure and figure out, is your business set up the right way? Is it smart to now go back and maybe create a holding company and create a separate company if you want to have some corporate locations mixed in with some franchise locations? Depending on the situation, you just need to be very, very intentional and clear on where you think the business is going and how the business structure is set up. And obviously, to do that, you need to go to a professional, to an attorney, to accountants, and so forth, to make sure from a tax perspective and from a liability perspective that your structure is set up the right way. Number 2 is your intellectual property. And most important is your trademark and service marks. When you have a food truck, you have a certain identity, whether it's a grilled cheese truck, whether it's an Indian truck, whether it's a bacon food truck. Ideally, you're going to have a logo. You're going to have an identity that's associated with your food truck. You need to make sure that that's protected, and you need to make sure that that is registered the right way, especially when you franchise. You have to understand that one of the main components that you are passing on to a franchisee when you franchise your business is their ability to now use your mark, your trademark, your logo, your brand. You must make sure that that is protected. Number 3, the franchise disclosure documents and franchise agreements. Just because you're taking a food truck and turning it into a franchise, in the eyes of the law, that's like any other franchise. And any other type of business that you turn into a franchise, you must put together a franchise disclosure document, and you must put together accompanying franchise agreements. Now, the franchise disclosure document has mandated 23 federally required items that are in the agreement. Essentially, it's a history of your business, a history of the owners, speaks a lot to your systems and your processes and what the franchisee is ultimately going to get. And there's a host of other things and other information in there, but you must make sure that you've got a good franchise disclosure document and you've got a good franchise agreement to go along with it. And the thing about it is that a lot of people don't think about is that there's not just one way to franchise. There's multiple ways to franchise. As an example, a lot of people, when they turn their business into a franchise, they think to themselves, how am I going to expand this? Do I want to expand this individual store by individual store? Well, that's an option. Or what a lot of people look at is what's known as sort of a master franchise scenario, where you find somebody within another location, that maybe it's another state, and they become a franchisee, but they become a master franchisee where now they're in charge of going out and finding other franchisees for the various territories that are open. There's area development agreements. There's all sorts of ways in which you can franchise. But the important point here is that you really need to figure that out on the front end of what you're doing. And so you need to know and know what your options are before and during the process of franchising your food truck. Number 4, you really, really need to take all that great information that's up in your head and get it down into an operations manual and have a marketing plan, which is usually included in an operations manual. So, in working with a lot of entrepreneurs, the classic scenario, and it seems to play itself out across the board, is that, entrepreneurs have everything up in their head. Well, if you want to franchise your business, you need to get all that down on paper, because you need to get your system, your process, how you do things down on paper so other people can follow your system. They can't follow it if they can't see it, if they can't read it, okay? And one of the interesting things that happens, at least with the businesses I've worked with in helping them through this process, is that you can really streamline your processes much, much more when you get them out of your head and onto paper. Because when you can see them written out, you can have a much better idea of, ooh, wait, maybe I can cut this out of the process, or why am I doing this? And it's a great exercise for the entrepreneur owner to go through, and it's a must before you franchise. So you must create the operations manual, the marketing plan for how the franchise will operate. And then number 5, you must understand the registrations, filings, food permits, or any kind of certificates that you're going to need to move forward with the franchise. When you're dealing with a food truck business, you're definitely dealing with a business where you're going to need a permit. And I would venture to say in almost every city or state, you're going to have to go through the process of getting the permits that are necessary. Now, a lot of times the states will have state permits, and the cities and counties will have separate permits as well. So you need to be sure that you find out what kind of permits are associated and what kind of process you have to go through to get the permit so that you can operate legally within the cities and states that you want to operate. In terms of registrations, there's 15 states in the U.S. that have franchise statutes in addition to the federal laws that regulate them. There's other states that have business opportunity laws, which are very similar to franchise statutes. And then there's other states that don't necessarily have franchise statutes, but they have exemption statutes that you have to follow to make sure that you are exempt from certain filings. I tell you all this because that's just part of the process of turning your food truck into a franchise, is you must make sure that you are registered properly and following the various laws within each and every state that you're operating. So really, there's a lot that goes into each of these 5 steps, but on this episode, I just really wanted to hone in on, especially in the food truck business, the 5 things that you really need to be cognizant of if you're thinking about turning your food truck into a franchise. And as a quick recap, number 1, what's your business structure? You need to sort through all that. Number 2, your intellectual property and trademark issues and registrations. Number 3, the creation of the franchise disclosure document and the accompanying franchise documents. Number 4, your operations manual, your marketing plan, and your business plan in general. And number 5, your registrations, your filings, your certificates for operation, and your food permits. Really encaptured in all of those 5 steps is everything that you will really need to know. Now, there's a breakdown of each one of those I'm not going to go into on this episode, but certainly, the process I take businesses through is a component of those 5 steps, but broken down even further. Well, I hope that this helped you. If you have any questions, please email me at josh@franchiselaw.com. I love getting questions from my audience. I love answering them on air. And hopefully at least one thing I said today rang true for you and maybe helped you out as you're searching through and thinking about your options for growth. I mean, there's nothing more that I love to do in business than to help entrepreneurs grow and scale their businesses. I happen to focus on doing that through franchising and licensing, but there's multiple ways to do it. But with the food truck business, just like with any business, when you're looking to expand through franchising, you have to be careful. You have to make sure you're dotting your I's, you're crossing your T's, and you have to make sure it's the right time to do it. So hopefully you've thought about these things. If you have questions or if you're thinking about these things now, like I said, please feel free to reach out to me. Hope you enjoyed this episode. And until the next time, happy franchising.
Thanks for being with us today on the Franchise Euphoria podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to go to iTunes and provide a review. Also, please remember that although Josh Brown is a licensed and practicing attorney, nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice, because it is not. The information contained in this podcast is general and educational in nature, and none of it should be relied upon as legal advice. That being said, if you have questions for Josh and would like to contact him, please email him at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you tune in to our next weekly episode.